Welcome to the first of our Centurion Studies, our study of Revelation, which I've subtitled Apocalypse Soon. And for those of you in my generation, you'll realize the reference. But I like that title because of the first verse in Revelation, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his bondservants the things which must soon take place. We don't know when the events outlined in Revelation are going to take place, the future ones anyway, but we do know that they're going to happen soon, and there's a lot of things lining up, maybe to be our generation, but at any rate, we need to be aware, and we need to be educated, and that's the purpose of this Centurion study. So let's take a look at Revelation just from a standpoint of an introduction. First and foremost, the title of the book is The Revelation, not Revelations. And we hear that misquoted a lot of times and misstated. So just to be technically correct, we should refer to it as the Revelation, the Apocalypsis. And the Apocalypsis in the Greek means something has been hidden in the past and it is now being revealed. That's the concept of apocalypse, or what we would call apocalypse. Now, that's taken a different meaning in our culture over time. You know, we talk about the zombie apocalypse or something of that nature, meaning end-time events. It's not what the word means. It's come to mean that because the apocalypse, the Revelation, is about a lot of end-time events. The majority of the book is devoted to that. So it's kind of become in common usage to refer to end times. That's not what the meaning of the word actually is. It means an unveiling or revealing of something that was hidden that has now come to light. And so the next question is, well, whose revelation was it? And oftentimes we say, well, it's the revelation of John. Well, it was revealed to John, but the scripture tells us, the text, is the revelation of Jesus Christ. It's his revelation, not John's revelation. So we see Christ revealed throughout Scripture. This is one of our points with our approach to epistemology, the identity of Christ. He's revealed in the Old Testament in prophecy, and we'll look at a lot of that in our study. He's revealed in the Gospels in history. He's revealed in the book of Acts in the newly formed church. He's revealed in the epistles, in Christian experience, and he is revealed in Revelation in his coming glory, which we'll get to see when we get to chapter 19. Well, we might get to see it for real, but we'll certainly get to see it in our study when we get to chapter 19. So to whom was the revelation given? Another common answer is, well, it was given to John. Well, yeah, sort of, but the text tells us the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him. It was given to Jesus first and then passed down to John. So keep that in mind. That becomes a very important aspect of our whole study here. And also want to invite you to be sure you have your manuals out and that you've got them printed off. They should be available to you there on the website. Print those off because there's going to be fill in the blanks. It's an interactive manual. It's designed to be that way. Those of you that are visual learners are going to love that aspect of the course. Those of you that are auditory learners don't like to write anything down, and you're not going to like that so much, but it's my little subtle way of keeping you engaged, keeping you focused, keeping you attentive as we go through the training. So be sure to have that printed out so you can fill in the blanks. And this is the first one. The revelation was given to Jesus first. So, and we'll examine that in more detail when we get to chapter 1. What are some of the key elements that we're going to be looking at here? Well, there's God's message to the churches, right? Jesus dictates 7 letters to 7 churches that really existed, and we'll be taking a detailed look at them when we get to chapters 2 and 3. Some commentators say that may be the most important part of the book of Revelation because that's a message to us as those who have ears need to hear the message that Jesus gives to the churches. This catastrophic end of the present age, the majority of the book is focused on that from chapter 5 at least onward to the end of the book, where we're going to see the catastrophic end at least until chapter 19. Then we see the new heaven and new earth. We see the millennium and then the new heaven and new earth in chapters 20 and 21. So we'll be focusing on that. What are some of the key indicators there? The dramatic reappearance of Jesus at his second coming in Revelation chapter 19 when he sets some things right. He rescues the world at that. We often call it the Battle of Armageddon. When we get to chapter 19, we'll see that it's really the Battle of Jerusalem. Armageddon was just a gathering place for the armies preceding their march to Jerusalem. But Jesus comes back in his glory, stops that battle, protects Jerusalem. Otherwise, all flesh would be killed. But he came and saved the day at the last moment. And we'll see him setting up his eternal reign there during the 1,000-year millennium. And Satan is going to be imprisoned during those 1,000 years in the abyss, the abuso, the bottomless pit. We'll examine that in great detail when we get to chapter 20. And we have this 1,000-year reign of Christ on planet Earth. Now, not everyone will agree with this particular view. It's called the premillennial view. We'll examine that more in a moment. But that will be the perspective that we'll be taking as we go through this study, the classical view, classical premillennial view that the church has had. We'll see a final rebellion against Christ, which is really odd, at the end of the millennium when Satan is released for a short time, and then he is ultimately thrown into the lake of fire along with the beast and the false prophet. And the eternal state. And chapters 20 and 21 will be getting into the new heaven and the new earth that comes at the end of that 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ on planet Earth. Now, there's about 404 verses in the book of Revelation. There's over 800 allusions to the Old Testament. And one of the reasons that modern-day Christians, I think, find so much weirdness in the book of Revelation, all these strange symbols and stuff, is because we're really not as well educated in Old Testament concepts as we should be. And as a result, we find them to be a bit odd. But as we go through our study, we'll discover that most of these symbols are decoded either in the book itself or somewhere else in Scripture. One of our great joys will be running some of these down. And then another aspect is there's a unique blessing to the reader. That's the only book that has this unique blessing, this unique promise to the reader of a blessing for those that read and hear the words and heed the words that are contained in that prophecy. So it's the only one that has the audacity, if we want to think of it that way, to say, read me, I'm special. Another reference to my mentor, Chuck Missler, is fond of saying that. So here's our blessing, chapter 1, verse 3. Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of the prophecy and heed the things which are written in it. That's our blessing. So if nothing else, we're going to get a blessing just by going through this study and just by reading the Scripture. Now, the human author, of course, John the Apostle, what are some of the things that we know about him? Well, he was the son of Zebedee and Salome. He was a brother of James. Jesus called the Boanerges, and I may be butchering my ancient Greek here. If there's any ancient Greeks in the audience here, please forgive my butchering of the language. I'm not classically trained in that. But he was the brother of James. Jesus called them the sons of thunder. He was born in Bethsaida. He's a Galilean fisherman, of course. He partnered with Andrew and Peter, an early disciple of John the Baptist, and apparently had some political connections during the day with the high priest and Nicodemus, which is interesting. He was a member of Jesus' inner circle. Remember this, at the cross, he's assigned by Jesus to take care of Mary, Jesus' human mother. You know, son beholds your mother, mother beholds your son, is the whole thing where he's kind of given that delegation to John and entrusting him to take care of his mother after his death on the cross. John referred to himself as the disciple or the apostle that Jesus loved, and so we often think of St. John the Beloved, for example. And he wrote the Gospel of John, of course, but he wrote some other books of the Bible, the human author, 3 epistles, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. 1st John, sort of a love letter. 2nd John, probably a personal letter to Mary. I'd encourage you, when you have some time, to go back and read 2nd John from that perspective and see if that speaks to you as well. And 3rd John, a personal note to Gaius. He wrote the Apocalypse, the Revelation, which we're studying here, of course. He was exiled to Patmos. He did not die there. He was exiled by Domitian. But we have a number of historical references that show that he did not die there, that he retired to Ephesus, probably to set some things straight there in the church in the aftermath. And we know this. We know we could run faster than Peter, right? Because remember, they got in the foot race to go to the tomb, and John outran him. So even though he was fleeter of foot than Peter was, apparently. So that's an interesting little side note. Now, let's talk about some of the alternative views of the book of Revelation. And I'll explain to you the one that we're going to approach it from. But there's a number of different views, obviously, and we'll touch on them as we have opportunity going through the study. The idealist view is that you really can't take anything in Revelation literally. It's all allegorical, it's all symbolic, and of course it is greatly and largely symbolic. We'll talk about those signs and how we should be approaching our interpretation of them. I like to say the origin of this view, the origin was with Origen, because I thought that was funny. But 2nd century AD is where this idealist view apparently came onto the scene. The preterist view is very prevalent within the church, and the preterist view is that, well, some of those events may have been future in John's day, but they've already occurred in our past, such as the destruction of the temple and siege of Jerusalem that occurred in 70 AD. If you're going to buy into the preterist view, that does cause you to take a look at an earlier date for the book of Revelation. I tend to believe it was written about AD 90. If you're going to buy into the preterist view, then you'd have to say, well, probably it was written prior to AD 70, or either John was reporting on past events when he recorded some of these events. So I'll let you grapple with that on your own. The historical view, as all these events, they're all symbolic, they're all allegorical, but they represent the history of the church age. I think there may be some degree of legitimacy to that particular view, and we'll look at that when we get into chapters 2 and 3. I'm going to at least present to you, I'm not going to be dogmatic about it, but a dispensational view that the letters to the 7 churches do in fact reflect, in the particular order that they're in, do tend to reflect a history of the church age, the gap in Daniel's 70th week prophecy that we'll pick apart as well out of Daniel 9. The futurist view is that it's largely prophetic. It's largely about events that are yet to come and still in our future. And that will be the perspective that I'm going to be coming at this from. Once we get to, say, chapter 5, and we've got the 7-sealed scroll coming on the stage, and the Lamb begins to open those scrolls as we get into chapter 6 and following, we're going to be looking at them from the perspective that those are events that are yet future. Some of them may have already occurred, but I think the vast majority of them are going to be in future yet to come. So that'll be my perspective in presenting this training. Take a look at these verses. It might be worth running some of them down ahead of time. Is the Revelation claims to be futurist. It's talking about things that have yet to come, the metatauta, the things that will happen hereafter. So keep that in mind as you go through our study as well, is that will be the perspective that we're coming from, and you make up your own mind as always. Don't believe anything I say. Remember, that was one of our key principles of doing one of our inductive Centurion studies. Don't believe anything I say. You got to be a good Berean here, and you got to go to the scripture and study it and examine it daily to see if what I'm saying has any weight whatsoever. So don't take my word for anything. In the Old Testament, there's over 1,800 references to Christ's rule on planet Earth. We'll really dig into that when we get to chapter 20, if you stick with me that long, that there are many different references throughout the Old Testament. Some books are really emphasizing that particular event. In the New Testament, we have over 300 references to Christ's second coming. It's mentioned in almost every one of the books of the New Testament. And here's an interesting factoid. For every prophecy of Christ's first coming, there's 8 of them talking about his second coming. There's a 8-to-1 ratio there about his second coming. So this is a very pivotal event in the biblical narrative, and a pivotal event, obviously, probably the pivotal event in world history. So the Bible records more about these end-time events than any other period of history. So we're going to have the privilege of taking a look at these things from the biblical perspective. Now, I mentioned to you in our introductory video to inductive studies about hermeneutics, the theory of interpretation, and there's 2 broad categories. There's the literal view that we're going to take the Bible at its word, and we're going to take it literally whenever we can, understanding that there are certainly our allegories and metaphors and idioms and all sorts of other figures of speech in the Bible, but that'll be our default, to take it literally. And of course, the allegorical or figurative view is that we're just going to take it allegorically. Nothing's to be taken literal unless it's clearly that way. And these are sort of opposite ends of a spectrum or a continuum, and we're going to gravitate toward the literal end, understanding that this book in particular is full of symbolism. It's full of various types of signs that we're going to have to decode. But once we've decoded them, then we're going to begin to look at it. Can we take this literally, and I think by and large we'll be able to do that as we go through it. I think you'll find that interesting. There are passages that are going to be both, particularly in this book, and we may slide up and down this scale on our hermeneutics. We'll talk about that as we go. Eschatology is the study of end-time events, and there's sort of, there's a handful of different views relating to this. One is the premillennial view. Now, the premillennial view means that the belief of this particular view would be that the millennium is really actually going to occur. There's actually a 1,000-year period that is yet to come. It's still in the future when Christ is going to rule from the throne of David. This is what Gabriel promised to Mary. He said, you're going to have a son, his name's going to be Jesus, and he's going to rule from the throne of his father David. So he's going to rule from the throne of his father David. And that hasn't yet happened yet if you're going to take it literally. You could take it figuratively and say, well, he's going to reign on our throne of our heart or something of that nature. But if you're going to take it literally, the throne of David did not exist during Jesus' day. It does not exist today. And so it would have to be reestablished at his second coming. He assumes the throne of his father David. Right now he's on his father's throne. We have many references that Jesus is sitting at the right hand of the Father on the Father's throne. But the day will come when he takes his own throne on planet Earth, in Jerusalem, ruling from Mount Zion, and we'll pick all that apart as we go through our study, so stay tuned. This is the view that I will be approaching the inductive study here from, it's the classical view of the church, the premillennial view, and it's named premillennial because it's in reference to when Jesus returns. So he returns before the millennium, hence the name premillennial. But there are other competing views here. There's a post-millennial view, and the post-millennial view is that the millennium comes before Jesus comes back. So Jesus will come after the millennium, hence post-millennial view, and it's an indefinite period. We know it's not 1,000 years. We know we can't take that literally, even though it's mentioned 6 times in Revelation chapter 20 as being 1,000 years. We can't take that literally because Jesus has been gone now for over 2,000 years. So I don't know, maybe around AD 1000, Christians might have been thinking that he was going to come then, but if they were of the post-millennial persuasion. That, of course, did not happen. So now if you're still going to adhere to a post-millennial view of end-time events, you would have to come to the conclusion that it's not literally 1,000 years. That's just an allegory not to be taken literally, and that there's this indefinite period of increasing righteousness. In other words, the church has got to get the world, the planet, ready for Jesus' second coming through this period of increasing righteousness leading up to the second coming. This view, to a large degree, has been debunked, I guess is the right term, or abandoned maybe is a better term, by the depravity of the 20th and 21st centuries. Now, we've just seen so much bloodshed and so much evil in the world, it's kind of hard to believe that we're in a period of increasing righteousness since Jesus left the earth. So that view would be the church is going to be responsible for paving the way for Jesus' return, but we don't really see that happening in our experience. So that's largely been abandoned. The amillennial view is very prevalent in the denominational churches today. And this view is, well, the whole thing's just an allegory. It's just an allegory for the church age. It's not 1,000 years. It's none of that stuff. You can't take any of it seriously. It's just all figurative talking, and Jesus is going to come back one day. We don't know when that is, and when he does, we all go to heaven. So that's kind of the amillennial view, and it's very prevalent in the church. Amillennial, the word means lack of. So in other words, there really is no millennium one way or the other. It's just an allegory. And I like this one. I throw this in tongue-in-cheek. The pan-millennial view, that's the view that, well, it's all going to pan out somehow. I can't figure it out, so I just abandon my plans. I know, grown. But that's also very prevalent, and I want to encourage you that to tell you that no, this book is here for a purpose, and there's a blessing promised to us for a purpose. He says in first verse is to show his bondservants something. So this book is here for a purpose. It was meant to be understood. Chapter 1, verse 1 says, that very opening verse says that this was the revelation of Jesus Christ given to him to show to his bondservants, to show to them, to show it to us. We're his bondservants, so that we can understand the things which must soon take place. So Don't let the book of Revelation intimidate you. It's interesting that we chose it as our first in the series of Centurion Studies. We want you to understand it. It's a message for our time more so than ever, and there's a special blessing promised to us for seeing it through to the other end.